Welcome to 40 Fit Radio, where we bring you science-based, common sense information regarding fitness, health, and lifestyle for the 40-plus community. I'm your host, Darin, doctor of physical therapy with 28 years clinical practice experience, starting strength coach, and certified CrossFit trainer. Forty Fit Radio, real people, real fitness, real health. So welcome back to the 40 Fit Radio podcast. I'm your host, Coach D, and today is the last of a three-part mini-series on looking good, feeling good. And on the first two episodes, we covered, on the first episode, metabolism, the second episode, diet and how it affects us looking good, feeling good. And on this last episode, we're going to talk about exercise. And in specifics, we're going to talk about strength training and high-intensity interval training and aerobic exercise activity and how they all influence our metabolism and how they influence looking good and feeling good. So let's get started talking about exercise today. So the first thing we want to talk about is the three types of exercise and how they can potentially influence your overall health and wellness, your metabolism, the way you feel, and the way you look too, because I think we're striving for a good balance between those three or four things. So we talk about strength training as one form of exercise, which would be resistance training. In the form of strength training, that could be isolated work like bicep curls, tricep extensions. It could be machine work using machines. It could be barbell training, which is what I advocate and which what I think is the most effective. And so when we talk about strength training today, I'm mostly going to be referring to barbell training, and that would be the big four exercises. That would be the squat, the press, or some people would call it the shoulder press, the deadlift, and the bench press. Those four primary exercises being performed on a regular basis throughout the week, 2 to 3 times a week, or a 4-day split, or whatever your programming model requires based on where you are in your training development and in your strength development. So we talk about strength training. We also talk about high-intensity interval training. And these would be, like we've talked about in previous episodes, short bouts of exercise where you are at a much higher intensity level in regards to cardiovascular capacity, aerobic capacity, and potentially using quite a bit of strength too, but you're doing it for very short bouts. So it's high-intensity interval training. Then you're getting a rest cycle. So there's a work cycle and then a rest cycle. It could be 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3. It could be inverted. It could be 1-to-half, 1-to-a-quarter. So it matters what kind of interval training you're doing and what your outcome or your desired outcome is. So high intensity interval training. The other form of exercise would be just traditional long, slow distance aerobic training. Those could be multi-sport type activities or multi-activities. It could be biking, it could be like a triathlete too. It could be biking, running, and swimming. It could be rowing on a Concept 2 rower. It could be on an assault bike using a Schwinn Airdyne or running on a treadmill or cycling. It could be, we're basically just talking about longer, slower distance training here. It's usually longer bouts of 30 plus minutes, 40 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours even, at much lower intensities. Outside of those three primary forms of exercise, we have other genres of exercise and training, and those would be things like yoga or bar class. I know that's a new trend. It could be something like Zumba. I've never done Zumba, but I'm not going to badmouth it. I mean, it could be something like Zumba. It could be other types of training or other types of, I would prefer to call those exercise because you're not working towards a particular goal always. So unless there is a goal and there's some type of linear progression or progression over time in regards to technique or in regards to getting more advanced, then it really is just exercise because there's no specific goal in mind, and we're not trying to create a particular adaptation that we can use in real life. But let's say in yoga, if your goal is to become more flexible and you're doing more yoga over time, or you're advancing in your skill level over time, and you're adding positions, and you're being able to perform deeper and deeper into positions or farther and farther through the range of motion, then that could be seen as a form of training for mobility and flexibility. But we're really talking about, when we're talking about training, we're really talking about strength development. But we could be talking about any of the 10 general physical skills, and that's important to recognize. When we look at exercise and how it can make us look and feel good, one thing we need to recognize is there's probably not one magic bullet. There's probably not one magical thing that you can do that encompasses everything. But if there were one magic bullet, it would be barbell training. And we've talked about this in the previous episodes, and I'm a strong believer in barbell training, as you know, and I think it so well attacks all of the 10 general physical skills, and the research shows that good quality resistance training, it improves your aerobic capacity, it improves your anaerobic capacity, it improves your mobility, it improves your strength, your power, it can improve your speed, your agility, your coordination, your balance, your flexibility, your stamina. I mean, your accuracy. It can improve all of those things. And so there really isn't, in my program, I do more than one form of training. Now, some coaches and some lifters and some athletes out there might disagree with me, and they might only use barbell training. And I don't see a problem with that. I think barbell training by itself, along with proper diet and proper recovery and rest, can produce a very high quality of life and looking good and feeling good. So, if I had to choose one form of training, it would be barbell training combined with my quality diet and then proper recovery and resting principles so that I can take advantage of the training that I'm performing. Here's another thing you need to remember. You can't exercise off a bad diet. We talked about that before. You're not going to be able to train enough. Now I get it. There's a lot of people out there that taking off their shirt and looking good really isn't that important to them. They're first about function, and I'm first about function too. But I think if you've been doing this long enough and you've developed a great strength foundation and base, you can do with whatever you want in the future with your training. And one of my goals is I want to look good too. I want to have a body that looks healthy and fit and muscular. And as I have aged into my 50s, that's even more important to me. I think it's a sign of youth. It looks good in a suit and for a business meeting. And I think there's some value to having a physical prowess, to having a physical presence when you're doing business deals, when you're negotiating, when you're out in the workforce. I think when I see a businessman or a businesswoman who is well-dressed in a tailored suit or a tailored outfit, and they've got good body habitus. In other words, they've got good fit shape, and you can tell that they strength train and that they watch their diet, and they're presenting to me a product or service as a vendor or as a professional. It gives me a different perception. First of all, I know that they care about fitness and health. That's important, that they've developed some discipline in that area. So I think that it's important that we realize, though, that we're not going to be able to exercise off a bad diet. So it goes back to the second episode where we talked about, having that good diet to promote a proper metabolism through thermogenesis, a high protein diet so that we can promote muscle growth. And let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's important to go over in this episode. I saved it for this episode specifically. But, there's this question: does muscle burn that many more calories than fat? And the answer to that question is absolutely. And the basic principle here is that since lean mass, muscle and bone, requires more energy to maintain than fat, the resting energy expenditure is going to be higher with greater lean mass or in individuals that have more muscle mass in relationship to their total body composition. If you take two men of equal weight or women, but one has a higher ratio of lean body mass to fat mass, he will burn more calories at rest than the other counterpart, his other cohort. And in terms of numbers, this works out to be about 13 kilocalories per day for muscle and 5 kilocalories per day for fat. And it is accepted that 80% of the difference in energy expenditure is explained by body composition. The remainder is most likely determined by genetics, age, and gender, and other extraneous factors, internal or external factors. So I think it's important that you, as a master's aged individual, realize that we break some of the myths that if you're going to burn body fat and if you're going to look better and if you want to lean up, that you've got to do aerobic training. And that's just simply not true. It's not scientifically accurate. What is more accurate is this, and I have hundreds of trainees and clients over the years that have done this, and that is you get a proper diet and nutrition. If you're looking to lose weight, you're going to have probably a caloric deficit. If you're just looking to get kind of a repartitioning of body composition, you're trying to gain muscle mass and lose fat, but you want to keep your weight about the same, then you're going to have enough calories on board to do that, and you can't be in a calorie deficit. You've got to have at least probably a little bit more calories than you think you need, maybe 10% over, or if you're right at the baseline, there's probably not going to be enough calories there to support all that muscle growth that you're bringing on board and the muscle protein synthesis that you're trying to generate. So there's this misnomer out there that if you want, especially what do? They go out and run. Women and men both go out there and run, or they do 45 minutes of cardio, or they do that. My recommendation is that time in the gym is not consistent with how many calories you're going to burn during or after the activity and how well it's going to promote metabolism and growth of your body and having a lean, hard body. It's just, that's not good science. So what I would recommend is maybe something like this. Go in and do your strength training, hit the barbell 3 times a week for your basic foundation in building a factory of muscle mass that burns more calories per day than a factory that's got more fat mass, okay? And even if you have a higher fat ratio than you want right now in your body composition, you can start to shift that ratio and raise the muscle mass up and bring the body fat down more in alignment where you want to, just simply by doing strength training, because you're growing more muscle mass, more muscular density, more protein synthesis, and that's going to help that body start to improve that composition. It's also going to help with lots of other things that we talk about, the feeling good part of it. You're going to improve the connective tissue around your joints. You're going to improve the ability to function. You're going to be stronger to do things in daily life. And I will tell you, let's face it, a body with more muscle mass looks better. It just does. So that concept of, does muscle burn more calories than fat? Yes, it does. So that's important to realize. And the only way we build real muscle protein synthesis, the only way we build more muscle is to do true strength training, okay? Now, I know there's a lot of types of exercise out there. We've already covered some of those. And they all have benefits, but they also all have their limits. The beautiful thing about barbell training is there really is no limit. You can continue to progress. As long as your programming changes over time, you can continue to progress. There is a point in other types of even high-intensity interval training and other types of exercise where you're just only going to gain so much muscle mass. A lot of people, here's what I find with a lot of trainees and a lot of the clients that I work with and just people that I come in contact with everyday life and in the fitness community, and that is this. They get to a point, either through doing CrossFit or through doing bar class or Orange Theory or through some other, or maybe it's some type of aerobic training like cycling. I mean, I'm kind of amazed. I know ladies and guys that cycle 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and they have a very low muscle mass to fat ratio. they don't consistently burn enough calories based on their diet because their muscle mass is lower because they're burning off the muscle by doing all this long, slow distance. So, but you look at these other training models and what ends up happening is, you end up hitting a wall where you just can't get that remaining body fat that you want off, or you can't get any stronger because you're really not in a traditional strength training program. There is not a linear progression there. And as long as there's not a training model in place, you're going to hit a wall and you've got to change things. Now, a lot of people will try to change the intensity of their high intensity interval training. They try to go longer. Maybe they increase the load in the training, and all those things work for a certain amount of time, but eventually you need to get into some strict barbell training. And I know I harp on that, and it sounds so simple, but guys, this is the fountain of youth. It really does make a difference. And I've got several trainees right now that I'm working with one-on-one and in our classes in the gym. And you won't believe the body change, the look in their body difference, and how many comments they're getting when they go to, I have a female client that she was in a resort in Mexico recently, and a lady from out of nowhere kind of walked up to her and said, "Hey, can I ask you, what do you do for your back muscles?" And she was like, "Well, I lift weights." And she was like, "Well, what kind of lifts do you do?" And she explained she's a barbell lifter. And she said, "Oh man, your back is so well developed." And she said, so they started talking. They both realized they live in Texas. They both live in the same town. And so now my trainee is training that other woman, and she's doing barbell lifting. So it's great to see how that can affect that looking good, feeling good concept that we're talking about. So again, we talk about, one of the questions I get all the time, I think I've already addressed it a little bit, is does strength training with barbell, does it burn body fat? Yes, it burns body fat. It burns more body fat then and after training than aerobic training does, than long, slow distance training does. I know that's hard to believe because you don't feel the same. You don't sweat as much. You don't feel like you've done as much work. But as your linear progression changes over time, and as that weight becomes heavier and heavier and heavier over time, those sessions do get a little longer, and the intensity of load and the reps and sets and all those things, that does change over time, and it gets harder and harder and harder and harder. And you will then notice that, there are some sessions I go in today and I know it's going to be hard. And I hate to admit it, sometimes I dread the fact that I've got to hit this heavy weight that day or do this or do that. But at the same time, I know what the benefit to that is. And the benefit is that an increase in muscle mass means an increase in metabolism, an increase in total caloric burn. I am helping to keep midline obesity and fat mass off that I don't want on my body. And I'm also improving my function, the way I look, all of those things combined. So those are important things to recognize, is that, yeah, it's hard. And I know a lot of us, that are a little bit older, we're used to sitting under some voluntary hardship, but it's something that we just got to get used to. If you want to maintain that looking good, feeling good body, you're going to have to work at it. I told someone the other day, I told a patient this the other day, imagine that you only had, that you walked into an auto dealership, and the auto salesman basically told you this: pick out any car you want, you can buy any car, but whatever car you buy, that's going to be the last car you own for the rest of your life. So the question to you now is this: how well would you take care and maintenance that car, that vehicle? Would you regularly do the maintenance checkups? Would you make sure that you take care of it? Would you make sure that it's stored correctly? And that's the same question we should have about our bodies. If we know that this is it, man, this is the only body we're given, and we got to carry this from birth to death, then how well should we take care of it and use science and information and data, and instead of myth or fear tactics or other things that, fads and trends, and just use good, solid training principles. And you know what? Sometimes I know it's not real sexy, but guess what? It works. And that's what I'm all about. And that's what 40 Fit Radio is all about. It's all about what works. And this works really well. So let's go over some things real quickly that we've covered in the last 3 podcasts. And these are just some of the highlights from the last 3 podcasts. So from the metabolism podcast, metabolism is mostly controlled by your genetics, your age, and your gender. But there are some things that we can do through diet, through thermogenesis, through changing our lean mass content and repartitioning our body composition. By having a high protein diet, there are some things that we can do to influence our metabolism. But you've got to remember, you're not going to be able to exercise off a crappy diet. It's just not going to happen. Also, diet can influence your metabolic rate by increasing that protein, improving thermogenesis. But there are some basic principles that researchers have found over time that help people to maintain weight or to lose weight. And that is, number 1, they weigh weekly. Number 2, they have portion control. They eat throughout the day. Number 3, they usually eat breakfast. And number 4, if they're trying to lose weight, they have a calorie deficit. Less calories in, more calories being burnt, or more calories on the output side. Increasing muscle mass increases your metabolism, like we talked about. And the best way to do that, I think, is through barbell training, because it's classical strength model using a linear progression. And use those 4 big lifts, the squat, the press, the deadlift, and the bench press. Now, I do know, I do find that some of my older trainees, the bench press is a little bit more difficult. If they don't have a shoulder history and they have good, healthy shoulders, then we don't usually have a problem. But if they have kind of a shoulder history or an elbow history, I find that the bench press is harder than the press. And so sometimes we'll just focus on the squat, the press, and the deadlift. But we try them all at first, and we let the model and the training method determine whether or not we're going to have to pull one of those barbell movements out of the training program if needed. And the most important thing is that we keep those big 3 in there for sure, the squat, the press, some form of press, and the deadlift, because those are the things that are going to drive the most amount of muscle gain. And, we're not talking about getting big here. We're talking about just gaining good, lean, quality muscle mass. And if you're a female and you're worrying about getting big, you're worrying about the wrong thing. That is a fear that's not real, and it's something that's just a mythical fitness piece of information out there. And I can show you hundreds of female trainees who haven't gotten big, quote unquote, and they do barbell training, or they do CrossFit, or they do some other form of strength type training. So also remember this, we talked about that the muscle cell itself just naturally, in the way that it needs calories to sustain its life, its cellular life, it burns more calories than a fat cell does. Also, by gaining more muscle mass, we're increasing your body function, improving how your body looks. We also talked about the fact that we're improving your joint health, your metabolism, your hormone health will improve too. And if we drive those hormones, we're going to drive your libido too. Let's face it. We're going to improve your ability to perform and also to look good and feel good. So, well, this is the last in the 3 series on looking good and feeling good. And hopefully you've been able to find 1 or 2 pearls from each of the podcasts, the 3 podcasts that we've done in this series. And that's the goal. I realize that some of the information that we present on the 40 Fit Radio podcast, that some of it may be information you've heard before. My goal is that if you learn one thing and you actually are able to apply it as content into your daily life and it impacts your daily life, then we'll have done our job. And so we loved having you on the podcast today. Try to invite more listeners on the podcast. And if you can, put a review on iTunes, Stitcher, whether Google Music, whatever other form of podcast system or software that you use to download our podcast, and let others know about it so that we can continue to grow our listener audience. If you want to find us on Instagram, you can find us at 40FitRadio. You can also Instagram me and follow me at DL Deaton, Deaton. You can also find us at the 40 Fit Masters Community Group, which is in Facebook or on Facebook. And we also just started a YouTube channel that we're starting to work on. We're going to be launching some videos there. We also have all of our 40 Fit Radio podcasts on that YouTube channel. And you can also find them on 40fit.com under the 40 Fit Radio podcast tab. So Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for tuning in with the 40 Fit Nation.